I remember the first time my grandpa showed me lamb's quarters growing in the crack of our barn foundation. I was maybe 7 years old, pulling at what I thought was just another weed, and he grabbed my wrist, gentle but firm. "Boy," he said, "that right there fed more people than all the wheat in Kansas." I didn't believe him. How could I? It was growing in gravel, no water, no fertilizer, just this green thing pushing up through stone like it owned the place. He pulled a leaf and ate it right there, made me do the same. "My grandpa told me stories," he said, "stories about when this plant covered fields from here to the Mississippi, before the tractors, before the chemicals, when people knew what to eat without a grocery store telling them. Lamb's quarters, Chenopodium album, goosefoot, fat hen, pigweed, 100 names for the same truth. This plant outfeeds wheat by 300% per acre and vanished from American agriculture in less than 30 years. Not because it failed, because it succeeded without asking permission. My grandpa's people, the ones who worked this land in the 1920s and 30s, they'd harvest the leaves like spinach all summer long. Come fall, they'd thresh the seeds, tiny black things smaller than poppy seeds, and grind them into flour that didn't need rain, didn't need pesticides, didn't need anything but sun and dirt. One plant could drop 75,000 seeds. One plant. You plant wheat, you get wheat. You plant corn, you get corn. You plant lamb's quarters once, and your great-grandkids are still eating it. That's not agriculture, that's a relationship. But relationships don't scale. They don't obey. They don't require annual purchases of patented seed. So they taught us to forget. I've walked fields with old farmers, men in their 80s who still pull lamb's quarters by reflex. Their hands know it's the enemy before their minds remember why. Spray it, burn it, bury it under Roundup and prayers that this year's soybeans don't fail. I asked one of them once, old man named Curtis, why he hated it so much. He stopped, looked at the plant in his hand, really looked at it. "My daddy used to eat this," he said quiet. "We ate it every summer, better than the collards we planted on purpose. So why kill it?" He dropped it like it burned him. "Because the extension agent said it competes with the crop." The crop? Singular? The one crop? The obedient crop that needs 12 chemicals and a loan to survive. Lamb's quarters competes with nothing. It grows in the margins, the ditches, the spaces between your intention and the soil's memory. It doesn't compete. It reminds. My grandpa died in 1997. The last thing he planted on purpose was a patch of lamb's quarters behind the tool shed. He scattered seeds he'd collected for 40 years, kept in a mason jar labeled 1956 in his shaky handwriting. "They're gonna need this again someday," he told me. "When the machines stop working and the chemicals run out and people remember they got knees that bend and hands that work. And that patch is still there. I've never weeded it, never watered it, never done a damn thing but watch it come back every spring, thicker and taller, like it's been waiting all along for us to get out of its way. This is the story of the weed that outfeeds wheat, and why we declared war on it. The Cherokee called it goosefoot, because the leaves look like a goose's track in mud. 3 points. Simple. Honest. My great-grandpa's people had another name for it, one I can't pronounce right 'cause it died with the language, but the meaning stuck. The plant that asks nothing. That's what it was, what it still is if you know where to look. Before Columbus, before contact, before the whole world got rearranged by men with guns and Bibles, lamb's quarters grew in every indigenous garden, from the Atlantic to the Rockies. Not planted in rows, not fussed over, just allowed. The old folks passed down stories about how you didn't cultivate Chenopodium album. You made space for it, you let it decide where it wanted to grow, and it always chose the edges. The margins between the corn and the beans, the disturbed soil where you'd walked too many times. It wanted to be near people. My great-grandma, she was born in 1891, and her mama told her about the seed harvests, how they'd wait until late September when the plants turned red and gold like fire, then bend the stalks over baskets and thresh them with sticks. The seeds would pour out like black sand, finer than quinoa, smaller than amaranth, each one packed with protein that made wheat look lazy, 15% protein by weight. Wheat gives you 12 on a good year, but protein's just numbers. What mattered was the taste, nutty, earthy, a little bit like what dirt would taste like if dirt tasted good. You could boil it like rice, grind it into flour, mix it with cornmeal to make it stretch. The leaves, God, the leaves, you could eat them raw, boiled, fried, dried for winter. They tasted like spinach's tougher, smarter cousin, high in calcium, iron, vitamins A and C, oxalic acid, yeah, but so does spinach, and nobody's declaring war on that. The Hopi grew it, the Zuni grew it, the Pueblo people let it volunteer in their fields and called it a gift, not a pest. When Francisco Vasquez de Coronado marched through the Southwest in 1540, his chroniclers wrote about the wild greens that sustained the indigenous populations even in drought years. They didn't know what they were looking at, couldn't imagine a crop that didn't need dominion. Lamb's quarters survived because it didn't wait for permission. You know what else? It's native. Not to everywhere, but to enough places that it might as well be. Chenopodium album evolved alongside humans. We spread it, it spread us. A partnership 10,000 years old. By the time Europeans brought their wheat and their plows and their ideas about what a proper field should look like, Lamb's quarters was already here, already feeding people, already proving that agriculture didn't have to be war. My great-grandpa used to say his people never planted it on purpose after the 1880s. Didn't need to. It remembered where the fields were. It came back every spring like a dog that knows its way home. White folks thought we were lazy, he told my grandpa, letting weeds grow in the garden, but we knew something they didn't. The best crops are the ones you don't have to fight. He died in 1953, never saw a herbicide, never needed to, but by then the war was already starting. The extension agents were already visiting farms, already handing out pamphlets with pictures of lamb's quarters under the word eradicate. Not manage, not control, eradicate, like it was smallpox, like it was the enemy. The old folks knew better, but the old folks were dying, and their kids wanted to be modern, wanted to farm the new way, the chemical way, the way that required forgetting everything that came before. In 1978, researchers at the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania did something crazy. They actually measured lamb's quarters like it mattered. They planted it in test plots, controlled conditions, treated it like a crop instead of a criminal, and what they found should have changed everything. Protein content 4.2 grams per 100 grams of leaves. Spinach gives you 2.9. Kale gives you 4.3 on its best day. And kale demands fertilizer, irrigation, and constant vigilance against aphids. Lamb's quarters laughed at aphids. The seeds were even better. 16% protein. Complete amino acid profile, meaning your body could actually use it, not just process it and throw half away like it does with corn. They measured the yields. 1 acre of lamb's quarters allowed to go to seed produced 500 pounds of edible greens during the growing season. Then in fall, 500 to 600 pounds of seed. Wheat gives you maybe 2,000 pounds of grain per acre if you baby it, if the rain comes. If the diseases don't, if the market holds, Lamb's quarters gave you food and insurance in the same package. The Rodale researchers published their findings in a small journal, Organic Gardening and Farming, February 1979. I've seen the article. Yellow pages, thin paper, the kind of publication that smells like it's already forgotten. They called Lamb's quarters a crop of the future. Then nothing happened. No follow-up studies, no USDA grants, no agricultural extension programs teaching farmers how to harvest it. The research just stopped. I talked to a man in 2003, a retired agronomist named Dr. Eugene Fisk, who'd worked at a land-grant university in Iowa. He remembered the Rodale study, remembered talking about it with colleagues. We were excited, he said. Here was a plant that could grow in marginal soil, needed no inputs, and outperformed our best cultivars nutritionally. It was everything we said we wanted. So what happened? He looked at me like I'd asked why water's wet. You can't patent it, can't hybridize it in a way that makes farmers come back every year. It's too promiscuous, crosses with itself, with other Chenopodium species. You'd never maintain a pure line. So it's too successful. It's too free. In 1984, researchers at the University of Connecticut ran another trial. They found that lamb's quarters accumulated nitrogen in its leaves, then released it back into the soil when it decomposed. Natural fertilizer. The plant was feeding the earth while feeding people. They published in a journal called Economic Botany, Volume 38, Issue 3. I found it in a library basement in 2011, misshelved under ethnography. Nobody cited it, not once. Meanwhile, in those same years, the late 70s and early 80s, chemical companies were spending millions developing herbicides that specifically targeted broadleaf plants. Lamb's quarters was always in the photos, always the example of what needed killing. 2,4-D, atrazine, glyphosate. The science of eradication moved faster than the science of appreciation. By 1990, you couldn't find lamb's quarters research in any major agricultural database. It had been reclassified, not as a potential crop, but as a noxious weed in 12 states. The data didn't change. The plant didn't fail. The system just decided what questions were worth asking. I asked Dr. Fisk if he ever grew it himself after he retired. In my backyard, he said. Every year. I don't plant it. It just knows I want it there. You ever try to publish about it again? He smiled sad. You don't get grants to study weeds, son. You get grants to kill them. The knowledge was there. The numbers were there. But numbers don't matter when the system's already made up its mind. My grandpa was 9 years old when the sky turned black. 1935. The Dust Bowl. Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas. The whole southern plains turned to powder and blew away. Wheat failed. Corn failed. Everything that required plowing, required moisture, required the topsoil that was now in the Atlantic Ocean, it all failed. But lamb's quarters didn't fail. He told me the story 100 times, always the same way, like he was still seeing it. We thought we were going to starve. Daddy's wheat crop gone, just blew away in April. The garden buried under dust. We'd dig out the tomatoes in the morning, and by evening they'd be covered again. But there was this green, just patches of it, in the fence line behind the outhouse, places we hadn't plowed. Lamb's quarters, it didn't need the topsoil. Its roots went deep, 8 feet down, pulling moisture from places wheat couldn't reach. While everything else turned brown and died, Chenopodium album turned the color of money. They ate it every day, boiled it with fatback when they had fatback, boiled it with water when they didn't. Mama called it depression spinach, Grandpa said. We called it staying alive. His family wasn't alone. All across the Dust Bowl, families survived on lamb's quarters, purslane, and dandelion greens, the weeds, the plants that didn't need permission or rain or hope. There's a WPA interview from 1938, a woman in the Oklahoma Panhandle named Ethel Morrison. The interviewer asked what she ate during the worst years. Pigweed mostly, she said. Some folks were too proud. They'd rather take government flour. But pigweed was free and it was there, and it kept my babies alive. Pigweed, another name for lamb's quarters, the same plant. During World War II, the USDA actually promoted it for about 18 months. 1943 to 1944, they published pamphlets, Victory Garden greens, lamb's quarters, and other wild edibles. My grandma had one. I found it in a box after she died. Folded, stained, the pages soft from being opened too many times. It had recipes, lamb's quarter soup, creamed lamb's quarters pie. The government told people to forage it, to recognize it, to let it grow in their victory gardens because spinach seeds were being rationed and lamb's quarters asked for nothing. Then the war ended and the pamphlets disappeared. By 1950, the same USDA was listing Chenopodium album as a problem weed in agricultural bulletins. Not a food source, not a backup crop, a problem. What changed? The war ended, but a different war started. The chemical companies that had made explosives and poison gas needed peacetime products. They had factories. They had patents. They had nitrogen compounds that could be converted from bombs to fertilizer. But fertilizer only works if you need it. Lamb's quarters didn't need it. My grandpa went back to farming wheat after the war. Got a loan, bought a tractor, used the new herbicides the extension agent recommended. I sprayed lamb's quarters for 20 years, he told me once, and his voice cracked. Killed the same plant that kept me alive when I was a boy. Why'd you do it? Because they told me it was competing with my wheat, and I believed them. He stopped spraying in 1970, just stopped. Let the lamb's quarters come back in the margins. I figured if another Dust Bowl comes, my grandkids might need to know what it looks like. He was right. He just didn't know the Dust Bowl would be economic instead of ecological. The war started quiet, not with tanks or bombs, with pamphlets and men in clean shirts showing up at farmhouses with pictures. 1950s, post-war boom. American agriculture was getting modernized, and modern meant chemical. The herbicide companies had a problem, though. Farmers didn't think they needed herbicides. They had hoes. They had hands. They had kids who could walk the rows and pull weeds for free. So the companies had to create the need. They called it education. I've seen the pamphlets, collected them from estate sales and old barns. Monsanto, Dow Chemical, DuPont, all of them with the same message. Weeds aren't just inconvenient, they're thieves. Each lamb's quarters plant steals nutrients meant for your corn. Pigweed reduces wheat yields by 30%. A single velvet leaf can drink 5 gallons of water that belong to your soybeans. Belong to. Like the rain had a deed with your crop's name on it. They showed pictures of lamb's quarters next to stunted corn. Never mentioned that the corn was probably stunted because the soil was dead from monoculture, not because a lamb's quarters plant was drinking its milkshake. But the pictures worked. My uncle started farming in 1967. He told me the extension agents would visit every spring with free samples. Little bottles of 2.4-D, atrazine, just enough to spray a few acres. Try it, they'd say. See how clean your fields look. Clean, that was the word they used. A field with lamb's quarters wasn't diverse or resilient. It was dirty, and it worked. God, it worked. By 1970, herbicide use in the United States had increased 800% from 1950 levels. Farmers were spending more on chemicals than on seed. But here's the thing about lamb's quarters. You can't kill it easy. It evolved alongside humans for 10,000 years. It survived ice ages and droughts, and every human attempt to control it. A little glyphosate wasn't going to stop it. So the companies made stronger herbicides, then stronger ones, then cocktails, mixtures of 3 or 4 different poisons because one wasn't enough anymore. In 1996, Monsanto released Roundup-ready crops, soybeans and corn, genetically engineered to survive glyphosate. The idea was you could spray the whole field, kill everything except your crop. Finally, total control. Except lamb's quarters started developing resistance by 2002. I met a farmer in Illinois in 2008, guy named Ron Hendricks, who'd been using Roundup for 12 years. He walked me into his soybean field and showed me lamb's quarters growing thick as hair. "I've sprayed this field 4 times this season," he said. 4 times, and look at it. The lamb's quarters were thriving, dark green, taller than the soybeans. "What are you going to do?" "Spray it again. What else can I do?" "You could eat it." He looked at me like I'd suggested he eat his tractor. That's what the war accomplished. Not the eradication of lamb's quarters. That was never going to happen. The eradication of the knowledge that it was food. The companies couldn't patent the plant, couldn't own it, couldn't make it require annual purchases. So they made us afraid of it instead. They spent 70 years teaching farmers that lamb's quarters was the enemy, that a clean field was an empty field. That control mattered more than diversity, more than resilience, more than the memory that this weed had kept their grandparents alive, and it worked. Not because lamb's quarters failed, because we forgot it had ever been anything but a target. My grandpa used to say the chemical companies didn't sell herbicides. They sold forgetting, and we bought it by the truckload. Chenopodium album fed more humans than corn for 4,000 years. Let that sit with you. 4,000 years. Bronze Age to the Industrial Revolution. Egypt, Greece, Rome, China, India, the Americas, every civilization that left records also left evidence of lamb's quarters in their granaries. Then it vanished from human memory in less than 50 years, not because it stopped growing. It grows in every continent except Antarctica, not because it stopped being nutritious. The vitamins didn't leave, the protein didn't quit. It vanished because it wouldn't cooperate with monoculture. Monoculture requires obedience. 1 crop, 1 planting date, 1 harvest window, 1 chemical regimen, 1 buyer, 1 price. Lamb's quarters doesn't work like that. It germinates when it wants to, anywhere from April to August depending on temperature and moisture. It grows in tight rows or scattered patches. It crosses with other Chenopodium species, making it genetically unstable, impossible to trademark. You can't own it, can't control it, can't make it dependent, and in modern agriculture, independence is the original sin. I talked to a seed company executive in 2015, off the record. He'd had a few drinks at an agriculture conference in Des Moines, and I asked him straight, why doesn't anyone commercialize lamb's quarters? "You want the truth?" he said. "There's no business model. We can't hybridize it in a way that makes farmers buy new seed every year. It's too vigorous, too weedy. Plant it once and it's there forever." "Isn't that good?" He laughed. Not a happy laugh. Good for who? Not for us. Our entire industry is built on annual dependence. Seed, chemicals, equipment, all of it requires farmers to come back every season. Lamb's quarters breaks that cycle. So you bury it. We don't have to bury it. It buries itself. Who's going to promote a crop that doesn't need promotion? Nobody. That's who. The USDA hasn't funded lamb's quarters research since 1984. Not one grant, not one study. Meanwhile, they've spent $180 million on herbicide-resistant studies, how to kill the plants that won't die. Universities don't teach it. Agricultural extension offices don't mention it, except as something to eradicate. 4-H kids learn to identify it so they can pull it from their project gardens. We've built an entire agricultural system that only recognizes crops you can chain to a business model. Wheat works because you buy certified seed, patented varieties that require specific fertilizers, and pesticides sold by the same companies. Corn works because it's been engineered into dependence. Modern hybrids can't reproduce, so You're back at the seed dealer every spring. Soybeans work because Monsanto figured out how to make them survive poison, then sold the poison and the seed as a package deal. Lamb's Quarters doesn't work because it doesn't need you, sir. It doesn't need Cargill or Bayer or John Deere. It doesn't need loans or crop insurance or futures contracts. It just grows. And a system built on dependence can't tolerate independence. My grandpa used to say the saddest thing about modern farming wasn't the chemicals or the debt. It was the fact that farmers stopped recognizing food unless it came from a catalog. We're surrounded by groceries, he'd say, and we're starving because nobody taught us to see them. He died with Lamb's Quarters growing wild on his land, never registered, never certified, never approved by the USDA or blessed by the Extension Office, just there, like it had always been, like it would always be. Waiting for a system that remembered food doesn't require permission. It just requires recognition and the willingness to bend down and pick it. I met Sarah Blackwell at the Asheville Farmers Market in 2019. She had a table with bundles of greens that looked like they'd been pulled from a ditch. Dark green, serrated leaves tied with twine. A handwritten sign, Wild Lamb's Quarters, 12 LLB, $12 a pound, for a weed, and she was sold out by 9 a.m. "How long you been selling this?" I asked. 3 years, started as an experiment, now it's my best crop. Sarah wasn't some back-to-the-land hippie. She had a degree in agricultural economics from NC State, worked for Cisco for 8 years before she got tired of selling food that tasted like the plastic it came in. "I was going to do salad greens," she said, "lettuce, arugula, the usual. Then I noticed Lamb's Quarters growing in the margins of my field. Started eating it myself. Realized it tasted better than anything I was planting on purpose. So she stopped fighting it, started harvesting it instead. First year I gave it away. Nobody knew what it was. Second year I charged $5 a pound and people complained it was too expensive. Third year, $12, and I can't grow enough. What changed? I stopped calling it a weed, started calling it what it is, heritage greens, pre-colonial salad, the original superfood. Marketing, that's what changed. She wasn't alone. All over the country, small farmers were rediscovering Lamb's Quarters, not as a crop failure, as a crop opportunity. I found a guy in Vermont, Marcus Chen, growing it commercially on 4 acres. Selling to restaurants in Burlington for $15 a pound. "Chefs love it," he said. "It's got this earthy, mineral taste you can't get from cultivated greens. Plus, I tell them it's what the Abenaki ate, and suddenly it's exotic." He didn't irrigate, didn't fertilize, didn't spray, just let it grow, then harvested the leaves every 2 weeks from May to October. "My input costs are basically zero," he said. "My only expense is labor. Everything else, water, nutrients, pest control, the plant handles itself. 4 acres, 12,000 pounds of greens per season, gross revenue around $180,000 from a weed. Meanwhile, his neighbor was growing organic lettuce on 10 acres, fighting aphids and drought, and grossing maybe $90,000 if the market held." "He thinks I'm crazy," Marcus said, "but his lettuce needs babying. Mine needs benign neglect." The permaculture people figured it out first. They'd been talking about Lamb's Quarters since the 70s, but nobody listened because permaculture sounded like hippie nonsense. Now it sounds like climate adaptation. I went to a permaculture conference in Oregon in 2021. 3 different presentations on Chenopodium album, not as a weed, as a nitrogen accumulator, a food source, a companion plant that improved soil health while producing edible leaves and seeds. One presenter, a woman named Dr. Lucia Fernandez from UC Davis, showed data. Lamb's Quarters in polyculture systems increased overall yield by 23% compared to monoculture controls, not by competing, by cooperating. Its deep roots pulled up minerals. Its leaves shaded the soil, reducing evaporation. When it died back, it fed the earth. We've spent a century trying to eliminate this plant, she said, when we should have been learning from it. The audience was full of young farmers, 20s and 30s, people who'd never known agriculture before climate change made the old rules obsolete. They were taking notes, taking pictures, asking where to get seeds. You don't need seeds, Dr. Fernandez said. Just stop spraying, it's already there. After the conference, I saw a kid, maybe 22, on his phone, Googling lamb's quarters, learning to recognize what his great-grandpa knew by heart. The knowledge was coming back, slow, scattered, but coming back. Let me tell you what we lost when we forgot. Not just a plant, not just food. We lost a whole way of thinking about what agriculture could be. Every acre of lamb's quarters produces 1,500 pounds of edible greens during the growing season. That's from May to September in most places. You can harvest the same plant 6-7 times, cut it back, and it grows again. Then in fall, you get the seeds, 500 to 600 pounds per acre if you let it go. Total 2,000 pounds of food from 1 acre. No irrigation, no fertilizer, no pesticides, no debt. Compare that to modern kale, the vegetable we decided was a superfood. Kale gives you maybe 400 pounds per acre if you're good at it. Requires drip irrigation, regular fertilization, constant monitoring for cabbage worms and aphids. Input costs run $2,000 to $3,000 per acre. Lamb's quarters cost you nothing but the labor to harvest it. We traded abundance for control, or look at the nutrition. I've got the USDA data, the stuff they actually measured before they stopped caring. Lamb's quarters leaves 4.2 g protein per 100 gram, calcium 309 ml, iron 1.2 ml, vitamin A 11,600 IU, vitamin C 80 ml spinach. The thing we replaced it with 2.9 g protein, calcium 90 ml, iron 2.7 mg, vitamin A 9377 IU, vitamin C 28 mg. Lamb's quarters wins in everything except iron. And spinach costs 4 times as much to grow. The seeds are even more remarkable, 16% protein. All 9 essential amino acids, meaning it's a complete protein, like meat or quinoa. You could live on lamb's quarters and nothing else. People did, for thousands of years, but we can't live on kale alone, or lettuce, or any of the cultivated greens we've decided are superior. They're not superior. They're just obedient. Here's what kills me. We're in a food crisis, global food insecurity, climate change making traditional crops fail, droughts, floods, heat waves, and we're ignoring a plant that thrives in disturbed soil, needs no water, survives temperature swings from 20-degree showers to 110-degree fires, and produces more food per acre than almost anything we cultivate on purpose. Why? Because it doesn't fit the system. You can't get crop insurance for lamb's quarters, can't get a USDA loan to plant it, can't sell it to Cisco or Kroger because it doesn't have a PLU code. It exists outside the infrastructure we've built, so we pretend it doesn't exist at all. My grandpa used to keep a ledger, wrote down everything he grew, everything he spent, everything he earned. I found an entry from 1947. Lamb's quarters, fence line, 80 pounds greens, 12 pounds seed, cost $0, value priceless. He understood something we've forgotten. The best crops are the ones you don't have to buy. The most resilient food system is the one that doesn't require permission from corporations or governments or markets. It just requires knowledge. And we erased the knowledge. Not by accident, not through neglect, through active suppression. Every extension bulletin that called it a weed, every herbicide that showed it dying, every agriculture professor who taught students to identify it so they could kill it. Every one of those was an act of forgetting, deliberate, systematic, profitable. Because the people selling seeds and chemicals and equipment couldn't make money off a plant that didn't need seeds or chemicals or equipment, so they taught us to despise it. And it worked. For 50 years it worked. But knowledge doesn't die. It just waits. In the soil, in the old folks who remember, in the kids who are learning to look down instead of at screens. It waits for us to get desperate enough or wise enough to remember. We're getting there. Seeds are patient. That's what my grandpa used to say. Seeds don't care about your timeline. They'll wait. Lamb's quarter seeds can survive in soil for 1,700 years, 1,700 years. Archaeologists have found them in Viking settlements, Roman granaries, Egyptian tombs, pulled them out of the earth, planted them, and watched them grow. The plant never left. We just stopped looking down. Every parking lot crack, every abandoned lot, every fence line and ditch and margin where the mowers don't reach, Lamb's quarters is there, waiting. Not for permission, not for cultivation, just for recognition. I walked an abandoned farm in Tennessee last year. Place hadn't been worked since 1987. The house was gone, the barn was falling, but in what used to be the garden, Lamb's quarters grew thick as a carpet. 35 years, no human hand, no water, no care, just seeds remembering what the land used to be. That's the thing about Lamb's quarters. It doesn't need us to survive. We need it to survive. Every time the system collapses, and it always collapses eventually, Lamb's quarters is there. Dust Bowl, World War II, the next drought, the next economic crash, the next time diesel hits $10 a gallon and the trucks stop rolling, it'll be there. My grandpa's patch behind the tool shed is still growing. I scattered some of those 1956 seeds at my place 3 years ago. Didn't prepare the soil, didn't water them, just threw them in the gravel by my driveway. They came up that spring, came up the next spring, came up this spring. My daughter, she's 7 now, asked me what they were. That's Lamb's quarters, I said. Your great-great-grandpa ate that when he was a boy, kept him alive when nothing else would. She pulled a leaf and tasted it, made a face. It's bitter. Yeah, but bitter keeps you alive when sweet runs out. I don't know if she'll remember, don't know if her kids will remember, but the seeds will remember. They'll be here long after I'm gone, long after the system that